Welcome to Grief Heals, the podcast that explores how grief heals. Join us as we consider how grief invites love within ourselves, our communities, our world, our histories, and how it is that grief heals. I'm Lisa Michelle Zega here with Eric Simpson. Welcome to episode 8, which is going to be a do-over of episode 7 because we need better sound quality. We couldn't hear you, Eric.
I'm here and I'm alive and I'm well and I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, let's do it. So, Eric, to start, would you be willing to reflect on some of your thoughts about forgiveness?
Sure. I think that for me, forgiveness has always been something that has interested me because I have been in need of being forgiven. With that in mind, for me, forgiving other people has been relatively easy if I look into what their situation is, knowing that a lot of the times that when I have done things that have been in need of forgiveness, I have looked at my own situation and understood why I did some things. Not all the time. Other times I haven't understood why I've done some things. But just knowing my own need for forgiveness has helped me to be able to forgive other people and myself more easily. I guess those are some of the thoughts that I have right now.
Yeah. So, will you tell me what you mean by that, though? What is the forgiveness that you're speaking of? What are you actually doing when you're forgiving yourself or other people?
I'm basically letting go of any kind of punishment that I want to extend towards them or towards
Mm,
myself. So there is a distinction, I think, between forgiveness and reconciliation.
yes.
But when I forgive them, I think that it has to be wrapped up in compassion and not just, I'm just going to release you and you can go fuck off and do whatever you want, but more like if there is any kind of indication towards reconciliation, then I think it is a compelling argument that I should be open to that as a product of forgiveness. But
Yeah.
if there's not, then I will still forgive and hope for the best for everyone involved in whatever kind of relationship we're talking about.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I'm sure as a human, you've had this experience. You said so many things, and I feel like there's these different tentacles that have come for me from what you shared. And I feel like I want to grab on all of them all at once, but I'm going to start with the one that really kind of gripped my heart initially. And that is when you said forgiveness has always interested me because I've been someone in need of much forgiveness.
Right.
I remember one time I was actually going to the bathroom at someone's house and I noticed this little plaque and it said, all of my friends should buy a large graveyard in which to bury all my faults. And I remember I was about 23 years old and I sat in their bathroom and just cried. It gripped me so much of being someone in need of forgiveness. And what's coming to mind right now, saying this, I was also gripped by a great deal of shame.
Mm-hmm.
And my very existence felt like it needed forgiveness.
Right.
And what's weird is what I wanted people to do. This is so naive and such an illusion of the human condition. My little fantasy was I wanted them to release me and not be impacted by whatever I had done. Like I really had this fantasy that it could be just like
Right.
erased from their experience, erased from my experience, and moved on from as if it never happened. Thinking now, 30 some odd years later, what that must have been like for people connected to me. And the deeper the connection, the harder that must have been because I was really living from this flat, unrealistic, idealistic.
Right.
And I so wanted to be free, and my path to freedom was very naive. So that really brought up, actually, that right there makes the connection for me of the importance of grieving to have a complete forgiveness. And
Right.
I also think of forgiveness as a letting go of the right to punish. Punish can seem so harsh, but like to get back at, to be equal to, whatever it is, these things that we do, like I have a right to act this way because you hurt me.
Hmm.
That paradigm is the paradigm that I absorbed in my upbringing of like that is how we respond when we're hurt, we hurt back. And then the other thing is to recognize for both parties, myself and those who've hurt me, let's say, or whom I've been hurt by their actions or lack of actions, grieving the loss, the recognizing, first naming just that I even experienced a loss of what could have been, what I thought would be, being willing to feel that loss. And
Hmm.
then also, like, there are losses that to this day, as I mature, I understand them, not just cognitively, but in my body, I understand them more profoundly. And I continue to circle back to be able to grieve the loss and bring love to whatever was missed in that loss and bring love to those places. So I think that without grief, forgiveness is incomplete.
I think without grief, too, there's a tendency in which we would put ourselves in a hierarchical situation, maybe up on a pedestal, because we're the one doing the forgiving. We might have an image of we're granting this release to you. Even if we're doing it to ourselves, I could see that even seeing myself in such a way as where, well, now I'm going to forgive you like a king granting, immunity to someone or something like that. And that seems to be a very rigid and not even a true way. I think that's why I talked about seeing my own need for forgiveness and being able to grieve over what was lost helps to prevent us from making that kind of mistake.
What image or metaphor comes to mind? Like you've got the king granting immunity, but when grief is brought to the table,
Mhm.
what comes to mind as the new metaphor?
We're all sort of in this mess together, and there's an equality on that kind of grounding, I think, where we are connected and we both mess up, or I mess up for myself, and I've been hurt, I've hurt other people. From that basis, it's more of a communal type of action.
I feel so, I feel tender actually, but what I'm recognizing is I started and said, hey, I had so much shame. I felt like my existence required forgiveness in some kind of way.
Mhm.
And that hierarchy that you spoke of, like there's this way in which I saw myself as the lowly peasant
Right.
who needed that king to grant immunity. Man, that really showed up for me in my first marriage. I would grovel, right?
Mhm.
Trying to get back in the good graces, but within my own being, I saw myself as less than human. I didn't name that, Eric. I didn't even name the shame. I don't think I knew to name those things. It was just a pervasive experience of my existence. But when you said what you just said about the communal aspect and inviting grief, I also did not know how much ungrieved grief I, as a human, was carrying before I ever even met my ex-husband, and how that served to dehumanize me and allowed my shame to really flourish, if you will. Thinking of
Mhm.
shame flourishing, that's a odd combo there in my head, but it did. It was so much alive, and the fire burned bright. I had this experience of like, wow, if I would have known to grieve my own losses, what I needed that I didn't get, right? What I imagined or what I felt like any child would get, right? Just by existing, by coming into this world to be celebrated a life and attuned to and held and wanted. I didn't know that those parts of me that missed some of what I'm talking about needed grief to hold her, to love her, to say, hey, you matter. You
Hmm.
matter, and what you missed matters. And what you got that you didn't need, hey, that matters too. And had I known to grieve my own grief, how I might have had a greater experience sooner
Hmm.
of being a human and welcome to the human party,
Right,
instead of an outsider looking in, which I was for much of my life.
right.
As loud and crazy as I am, I still lived much of my life as an outsider to my
Hmm.
life.
Well, I think that's true for a lot of people. A lot of people feel
Yeah.
that way. And forgiveness coupled with grief is something that is healing for us. We forgive not just for the sake of the person that we're releasing, but for our own health. And I'm wondering if you hadn't ever discovered the power of forgiveness or of grief, what happens to a person when they just harbor unforgiveness, sometimes for years or even decades?
Well, I definitely want to answer that. And I want to honor the reason that some people are unwilling to forgive.
Okay. Yeah.
I believe that one of the main reasons is because we have muddled what forgiveness is, so that we think if I forgive you, I am saying what you did was okay,
Can you,
that it didn't matter. And so we're holding on to a sense of what you did was so wrong. And forgiveness is not condoning. It's not saying it was okay.
right.
It is acknowledging one that it happened. Like it's actually to to forgive is a gateway to grief, because in that posture of unforgiveness, I'm actually not even allowing the depth of what I lost to be felt, to
Hmm.
be seen. It's like having an armory, and I'm picturing these big, thick walls to keep out, but I'm also keeping love out. So forgiveness is not condoning. It
Hmm.
is not saying that it was okay. It's not saying that it didn't matter. And it's not reconciliation. Some
Right.
people think if I forgive you, that means I've got to invite you into my home. We've got to have, we need to break bread together. We need to hug. We need to. No, reconciliation is a work of both parties.
Right. And it takes time.
And it takes, right.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I remember it exactly, and I do want to honor the grief recovery method that first introduced me to this idea of forgiveness, but it's like releasing the hope for a different or better yesterday. And once I release that, releasing what I wanted you to be that you weren't, who I wanted you to be for me that you just for whatever reason were not able to be, that opens the space for me to see what I lost and to bring love to those places, right? Which starts, by the way, just bringing attention to those places, the heartache that we're carrying. So, full circle, what happens to someone who is harboring unforgiveness for years, decades? First, nurturing, tending, and care that is needed to heal is also kept out. There is a quote, you might even know it, by C.S. Lewis talking about the vulnerability needed to love. But the
Right.
reason that it's coming to mind is it also seems to paint a picture of unforgiveness, because he talks about this staleness and locking yourself away in this coffin where things harden and rot. They don't stay the same. And we have so many studies now that show the link between unforgiveness, our physical health, our mental health, our emotional well being. Unforgiveness legitimately kills. It,
Right.
it, it kills, and it robs the zest for life even while we remain alive. What have you witnessed in terms of unforgiveness?
Well, I would just agree with your estimation of it. I mean, I would just look into my own life and times when I have harbored unforgiveness and how it hardens the heart and makes you less compassionate and makes it harder to empathize with other people, makes it harder to empathize with yourself. You start to feel bad about yourself. You might start to look for ways to soothe yourself, the unease within yourself.
Yeah.
And that becomes just even more destructive. Part of what has prompted me to do that is the expectation to see some sort of sign within the person that I'm forgiven that they feel like they need to be forgiven, or for them to like ask me or for forgiveness, or to do something that meets my, I'm back up on that pedestal again.
Yes, I was on a treadmill, especially in Christian circles where forgiveness is talked about so much, right? This is what is required. We must forgive.
Right.
Forgiveness without grieving the our own loss and the loss of the other,
Mm-hmm.
and what we hoped for that we just were not able to pull off for whatever reason, what I was aiming for that crashed and burned. I was on a treadmill of I forgive you, but then you're supposed to want to be forgiven, just like you said. And I kept getting on that, on one or the other side of the pedestal. Either
Mm-hmm.
I was the high king
Right.
or the lowly peasant, but I wasn't equal, an equal human, an equal woman. So grieving was like breathing life into forgiveness for me. And now I marvel. I marvel at the level of compassion. There are people who I've been on the other side of their wounding, and not only do they not acknowledge it, they
Mm-hmm.
actually still feel victimized by me. Like, and I'm not saying that, hey, there are mutual things in the relationship that I'm thinking of, but I don't feel a need to hold their feet to the fire. And the other thing is, I feel an immense love and compassion. And it's not just one person, though there is one person coming to mind. Recognizing how incomplete forgiveness has been in my life without grief being a component. And I really think anybody who knows me recognizes that grief is the passion of my life, and I view it as love. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say that grief was my welcoming into human. And I was tired as living as pauper or king. I mean, physically tired. The deeper I go into this world of grief, or grief apprenticeship, you might say, the more human not only have I become, but the more human I see other humans. And also the more I love everything living. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
my level of care for life and my level of joy. I'm like, how does this work? And the magic, I'm just like, wait. You're telling me the most painful parts of my existence have also been what has awakened me to love that I've craved my entire life?
And this is especially important because when we're when you're doing grief work, you may be grieving somebody who has died, and you can't go to them or expect anything from them necessarily in order to forgive them.
And yet, my mom and I were just talking about this yesterday because I have people, many people, that have died that I have changed my relationship with, even though not while they were here alive with me, but since they've passed on, I have a new relationship with my biological father, a
Mm-hmm.
new relationship with the dad that adopted me, a new relationship with my sister, a new relationship with my grandparents. And that has come through forgiveness and grief and the relationship I have with them. It's like when you were asking about what happens with unforgiveness, right? And it makes things stale, it locks them up, but they don't just stay as they were, they fester.
Hmm.
It's like being able to release any of that and be left with the clean, cleansing water of who they were as humans and who they are to me. And I can commune with them completely differently, even than I was able to here, even with them on the other side, right? But I still experience their life. I don't know what's most sticking out to you today.
No, I think we pretty much delineated the basic contours of what forgiveness is in relationship to grief. There's more to explore or to talk about, but that's why we have a podcast.
Well, thank you for listening to another episode of Grief Heals.
You've been listening to Grief Heals with Lisa Michelle Zega. The podcast is produced by me, Eric Simpson, in association with Jump Up and Down Productions. Music by Ken Dalian, Drunken Nights to Sunday Mornings, and Stefan Carlin, A Calming Ocean, A Common Notion. If you would like more information about the work Lisa does, point your browsers to legityou.com. That's LEGITYOU. Lisa can also be reached at Lisa Michelle at legityou.com. This has been a Jump Up and Down production.